My name is Marjorie. I'm 61 years old, and just last week my daughter shattered my phone against the living room floor and told me I didn't need to make decisions for myself anymore. That moment, sharp and sudden, wasn't the beginning of my unraveling. It was simply the point where I truly knew I had to disappear. She snatched it out of my hands so fast I barely had time to react. "You don't need this anymore," Nina said coldly, her voice flat. "You're making things worse for yourself. I'll decide what's best for you." The phone hit the wood floor with a crack, the screen shattering instantly. I stared at it, stunned by the sound, but more by her tone. The girl I had raised, the child I had fed and protected through divorce, illness, and sacrifice, was standing before me like a stranger with no patience and too much power. Nina picked up the broken phone and examined it like a piece of garbage. "You were trying to text Aunt Vi again, weren't you, after everything we talked about?" she asked. "Do you want her panicking again, thinking something's wrong here?" She didn't wait for me to answer. She never did anymore. "This is why I have to take away your phone privileges. You're not thinking clearly. You're not stable." I sat frozen on the couch, hands clenched in my lap, trying not to let the shake in them show. My own daughter had started using words like stable and clear-headed when talking about me, usually to friends, sometimes even in front of me. It had started small, just little comments about my memory or how I lost track of time, how I repeated myself. I brushed them off. Everyone forgets a name here and there, right? But she kept pointing them out. Then came the suggestion that she should help manage my mail, my bills, my medication. She moved in with me a year ago after her divorce. I thought it would be good for both of us. I was lonely, she was fragile. But things didn't go how I imagined. I wasn't gaining a roommate, I was losing control of my own life. She brought routines, rules, no screen time after 8, no cooking without her home, no visitors unless scheduled. I let it happen, thinking maybe she was just scared, maybe she just needed to feel in control. But it never stopped. And then she got me a new doctor. I never met him. She said everything was handled online. She brought the prescriptions. She organized my pills. She told me what to take and when. That day, when she shattered my phone, I felt something cold settle inside me. Not fear exactly. Something clearer than that, something like clarity. I watched the pieces scatter on the floor and thought, there goes the last thing connecting me to the outside world. And yet there was no yelling, no crying. I just sat still and listened as Nina softened her voice and said, "You should rest." I left soup in the fridge. She walked into the hallway and disappeared into the study, shutting the door behind her. I stayed seated, staring at the floor. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't losing my mind. I still remembered every number in our street address. I could still recite the first lines of every Emily Dickinson poem I used to teach. But I also remembered the way Nina had taken over my banking access 2 months ago. The way my friend Delilah had stopped calling, how my painting supplies were suddenly stored in a locked closet for safety. This wasn't forgetfulness, this was a pattern, and the broken phone was the last piece of proof I needed. What she didn't know was that I had another phone, a cheap, prepaid burner I'd bought during a quiet trip to the pharmacy 4 months ago. I kept it hidden in my sewing box, between layers of old fabric and loose thread. She never checked there. She never cared about my old hobbies. That was where I would start. Tomorrow, I would make a move. I wasn't sure yet where I'd go, who I'd call. But I knew I couldn't let this continue. I couldn't keep letting her shape my reality. My name is Marjorie, and I am not crazy. I am not confused. I am not done. She thinks this is the end of my independence. But she's wrong. Tomorrow, everything changes. I was born in a small town in Missouri. The kind of place where everybody knew your dog's name and nobody minded their own business. I moved west to Oregon when I was 23 with nothing but a beat-up car, 2 suitcases, and a dream of becoming a high school art teacher. I got that job. I kept it for 35 years. I raised my daughter Nina, mostly on my own. Her father, Daniel, left us when she was 6. He had a new life and a new family within a year, and Nina never fully forgave him for that. I did what I could to make up for his absence. I went to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every late-night tearful talk when she was 16 and broken-hearted. I packed lunches until she was embarrassed by them, and kept doing it anyway. We were close, Nina and I, or at least I thought we were. After college, she moved to Seattle for work. She was always brilliant, sharp, too sharp sometimes. She climbed the ranks fast at her tech job. Then she met Adam. They married quickly, and just as quickly it fell apart. When she showed up at my doorstep last year with 2 suitcases of her own and swollen eyes, I didn't hesitate. I welcomed her in. That's what mothers do, even when their knees ache and their retirement plans are barely holding together, even when they crave quiet after a lifetime of noise. At first I thought it would be good. I imagined us reconnecting, cooking together, walking by the lake like we used to. But she wasn't the same Nina I remembered. Something in her had hardened. She was cold in ways I hadn't expected. Efficient, distant, she brought routines into my home without asking. Suddenly we had labelled shelves in the pantry, weekly meal plans on the fridge, pill organisers with colour-coded labels. I told myself it was just her way of coping, that after a failed marriage she needed order. But slowly I started to see how the order wasn't just for her, it was being placed on me. She started pointing out when I forgot things, little things at first, the TV remote, a neighbour's name. She'd say, "Mum, that's not like you," and I'd laugh it off. But then she started suggesting I should see a doctor, that maybe I was showing early signs. I resisted. I'd always been sharp. I had a memory for faces, for dates, for brushstroke patterns in paintings no one else noticed. I told her so. She didn't argue. She just started making appointments for me online. I never met the doctor in person. The prescriptions came in the mail. She handled the pickups. I should have pushed back then. But part of me wanted to trust her, because she was my daughter, because I didn't want to believe she could be wrong about me, and because I was tired. So I started taking the pills. At first I didn't notice anything, but slowly I began to feel foggy, like the edges of my thoughts were dull, like my balance was a little off. I blamed age. I blamed stress. I blamed everything but her. My bank card stopped working one afternoon at the grocery store. I called the bank and was told the account had been moved under new permissions. Nina told me she did it for my protection. "You almost sent $500 to a fake charity last month," she said. "You forgot, but I stopped it in time." I had no memory of that, and yet I started to wonder, was I forgetting more than I realized? One day I found an envelope in the kitchen drawer. It had the deed to the house, but the name on it wasn't mine. It was Nina's. I hadn't signed anything. When I asked her about it, she said I had, that we'd gone over it weeks ago, that I'd just forgotten. I laughed. I said she was mistaken. She smiled too gently and said, "That's what the doctor warned us about, these lapses. I'll handle it, okay?" I didn't know what to believe. I began writing things down, at first just grocery lists, then conversations, then dates. I kept the notebook tucked in my nightstand. She didn't know, or maybe she did and let it be, thinking it was harmless, but it gave me something to hold on to. I stopped painting, not because I didn't want to, but because my supplies were no longer where I left them. My easel disappeared, my brushes had been boxed and placed in a closet that now had a padlock. Nina said it was temporary, that she didn't want me slipping on turpentine or hurting myself with sharp tools. "You haven't painted in weeks anyway," she said. "Let's just make the house safer." Safer. That word echoed like a threat. I tried to reach out. I called my old friend Delilah, but the call never went through. I asked about her a week later, and Nina said she'd talked to her already. "Delilah agrees with me," she said. "She said you've been different lately, repeating yourself, forgetting conversations. She's worried about you too." I didn't know what to say. I started to doubt myself. I wondered if maybe I had called her. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe I was slipping, and that scared me more than anything. But then, one night, I woke up and couldn't remember where I was. For one long, terrifying second, I didn't recognize my own bedroom. I sat up, sweating, heart racing. I looked at the pictures on the walls, the familiar chair by the window, the worn rug I'd bought 20 years ago. It all came back in a rush. But something about that moment stuck with me, not just the fear, but the realization that someone had been working very hard to make me feel like I didn't belong in my own life. That was the night I dug out the burner phone from the sewing box, the night I typed the first message to Delilah in months. I stared at the screen for a long time before I hit send. "Help me," Delilah replied within minutes. She told me to call when it was safe, so I waited until Nina had left for the store. I locked my bedroom door and dialed. The sound of Delilah's voice nearly broke me. She sounded cautious at first, unsure, and then stunned when I explained what had been happening. She told me Nina had blocked my number months ago, that every time she tried to visit, Nina said I wasn't feeling well, that I was resting, that I didn't want company. Delilah said she'd started to wonder if I was avoiding her. She felt hurt. I felt sick. We agreed to meet 2 days later at a small cafe across town. I told Nina I needed air, a walk, time alone. She hesitated, asked if I'd taken my morning pills. I lied and said I had. She reminded me to be back before lunch. Her words didn't sound like a request. They sounded like a leash. At the cafe, Delilah looked at me like I'd come back from the dead. I hadn't seen my reflection in days, not really, but I saw it in her eyes. I looked thinner, pale, and older than I remembered. She reached for my hand. I told her everything. The pills, the banking, the house deed, the padlock. Her face changed with each detail. She leaned in, her voice low, and said, "Marjorie, this is not just overbearing. This is abuse. You know that, right?" I nodded. My throat closed up. "You need help," she said. "Not medical, legal, investigative. I know someone." Her name was Irene Chavez, former private investigator, now semi-retired, mostly helping women in messy family situations. Delilah had met her years ago at a volunteer event for elder protection. Irene agreed to meet me the next day. She didn't ask for money up front, she just wanted the truth. Irene was sharp, early 60s, short grey hair, no nonsense. She listened to my story without interrupting. She asked for names, dates, copies of anything I had. I handed her the notebook. She asked if I still had access to the prescription bottles. I told her yes. She asked me to send photos. That night I waited until Nina was asleep, crept into the kitchen, and photographed the label on every bottle. I sent them to Irene. She responded with a single message. "These are strong sedatives, Marjorie. Most doctors wouldn't prescribe them to someone your age unless under very specific conditions. Who is Dr. Peters?" I froze. That was the name on the bottles. I'd never met him. Nina said he handled everything virtually, I replied honestly. Irene didn't respond for a full day. When she did, it was to inform me that no Dr. Peters was listed in the Oregon Medical Directory. The license number on the bottle traced back to a veterinarian. I felt dizzy. Irene told me to hold tight. She was digging further. In the meantime, she told me not to take any more pills. I agreed. The next few days were harder than I expected. I didn't realize how much those pills had altered my sleep. I had headaches, nausea, but I stayed focused. I kept the burner phone charged. I deleted every message after reading. I wrote down everything Nina said. One evening, Nina came home with groceries and handed me a folder. She said it contained updated medical notes from Dr. Peters. She wanted me to sign the last page. "It's just an acknowledgement that you've read the treatment plan," she said. I pretended to skim. I told her I'd sign it after dinner. When she went to shower, I took pictures of every page and sent them to Irene. 3 hours later, Irene called. She said the documents were fakes. The letterhead belonged to a real clinic that had shut down 6 years ago. The signature at the bottom was a scanned copy of another physician's name pasted into the file. "This is fraud," she said flatly. "Documented fraud. It's criminal." I asked what we could do. Irene told me we had to move carefully. Nina had already cut off my access to finances. If she suspected I was preparing to fight back, she might escalate. We didn't know how far she was willing to go. I asked her what I should do. She paused before answering. "We gather more, we expose it, but we do it on our terms." That weekend, Nina went out to visit a friend. I took the opportunity to check the hallway closet. I broke the lock with a hammer I'd hidden under my bed. Inside were my painting supplies, as I expected, but also a box labelled Marjorie's Records. It wasn't mine. I opened it. Inside were copies of my birth certificate, social security card, insurance policies, and a printed file labelled Cognitive Assessment Notes. I'd never seen them before. They were full of lies. Observations like "subject appears increasingly paranoid, needs supervision," and "recommend full guardianship transfer to Nina T." My chest tightened. I snapped photos, every page. Irene called that night. She had more news. Nina had recently updated a life insurance policy listing herself as the sole beneficiary. The payout was substantial, $2 million. It had been updated just 3 months ago. "This is more than control," Irene said. "She's financially motivated. You need to be careful." I asked her what she meant by careful. She told me not to be alone with Nina more than necessary, to keep every conversation short, to never eat anything unless I'd prepared it myself. I felt sick. The kitchen, the place where I used to bake cookies with my daughter, now felt like a potential crime scene. Nina noticed the change in me. I could tell. She became more watchful. She started asking more questions. Where was I going? Why was I closing my door so often? Was I feeling all right? Was I taking my medication? I kept answers short. I kept my phone hidden. I didn't trust my own bathroom anymore, so I changed in the dark. I stopped showering unless she was out. The house felt hostile. I was always listening for her footsteps. I knew I had to get out. Irene said she was putting together a team. A lawyer, a financial consultant, a contact at the elder abuse unit. But we needed one more thing, proof audio, something undeniable, something Nina couldn't explain away. I told Irene I had an idea. I would provoke Nina, ask her directly, lead her to say too much. Irene warned me it was risky. I said I was ready. The next morning I asked Nina if we could go for a walk. She agreed. I hid the recorder inside my cardigan pocket. We walked to the neighborhood park. I made small talk. She responded coolly. Then I asked, "Nina, do you really think I'm losing my mind?" She looked at me surprised, then smiled gently. "Mom, you don't need to worry about that. Just let me take care of things." I pressed further. "Even the house? The money? The pills?" Her smile faded. "You've been through a lot," she said. "But yes, I'm doing what's necessary. One day you'll understand." Her tone was clipped, controlled. But she was slipping. I said, "I remember signing over nothing. I remember trusting you." Her eyes narrowed. She said, "And you'll keep trusting me, because honestly, if you don't, I don't know how much longer this little arrangement can last." I said nothing. I let the silence hang. She didn't fill it, but her grip on my arm tightened. When we got home, I sent the recording to Irene. She told me it wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was something beginning. "She's cautious," she said, "but she's made mistakes. You've documented some. We'll push for more." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark and stared at the moon through my window. My daughter was trying to erase me, and I was done letting it happen. The next morning I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. My body was tired, but my mind was clear, sharper than it had been in a long time. I had stopped taking the pills nearly 2 weeks ago, and I could feel the fog lifting. I brewed a pot of tea and sat quietly in the kitchen, listening for any sound from Nina's room. The apartment was still. That calm didn't soothe me anymore. It unsettled me because silence here never meant safety. It meant waiting. I called Irene from the burner phone. She picked up on the first ring and spoke in her usual steady tone. "I think it's time," I told her. "Time to vanish." There was a pause, and then she said, "We'll help you leave. But once you do, there's no coming back until we've got everything ready to move legally. Are you prepared for that?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Yes, I am. I don't know how much longer I can play along here." We set the plan for Saturday morning. Nina always slept late on weekends. Irene and Delilah would meet me at a diner 2 towns over. I would leave before sunrise with only what I could carry. In the days leading up to it, I moved carefully. I packed a small bag and hid it in the back of the linen closet. I transferred the most important pages of my notebook into a smaller journal. I double-checked my recordings and kept the burner phone close. I barely spoke to Nina. She didn't press. Maybe she thought her grip was too strong to loosen. Friday night I lay awake listening to the wind outside. I thought about all the birthdays I'd spent in this house, all the holidays where Nina used to laugh beside me. I thought about my late husband and how he'd left so quickly, so easily, as if we were just a chapter he could tear out. And now my daughter was doing the same thing, but slower, more calculated. I thought about the betrayal and the silence and how dangerous love could become when twisted into something controlling. At 5 a.m. I got dressed in soft sneakers and layered clothes. I placed the note on my neatly made bed, a simple message saying I needed time to think and that I would be in touch when I was ready. I made sure not to include where I was going. Then I slipped out the door, locked it behind me, and walked away from the apartment I'd called home for 22 years. The air was cold, but I didn't shiver. I took the back streets, the ones I used to walk before Nina came back into my life, and closed them off with suspicion. By 7, I was sitting at the corner booth of the diner, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee I didn't drink. When Irene and Delilah arrived, I almost cried. Irene sat down across from me, her expression focused. "We're ready," she said. "We're going to get you your life back." They took me to a small rental home registered under Irene's business name. No one knew I was there. It was safe, quiet, and mine. Over the next few days, we gathered every piece of evidence I had. The fake medical records, the insurance updates, the financial statements, the recordings. Irene contacted an attorney named Paul who specialized in elder financial abuse. He reviewed everything and said we had a strong case. But he also warned us that Nina might retaliate, that her next move could be desperate, and she didn't disappoint. On the 3rd day of my disappearance, Irene received a call from one of her contacts at the local precinct. Nina had filed a missing persons report. She told police that I was mentally unstable, that I might be wandering without direction, and could be a danger to myself. She presented emails and text messages I had never written. One claimed I'd threatened to hurt myself if Nina didn't stop interfering. The language was cold and robotic, not mine at all. We needed to act fast. Irene arranged a meeting between me and Detective Marvin, who worked in the Financial Crimes Division. He listened carefully as we laid everything out. He asked pointed questions. He was skeptical at first until we played him the audio. Nina's voice calm, threatening, measured. "One day you'll understand why I'm doing this," she said on the tape. "I'm protecting both of us, but only one of us gets to be in control." His jaw tightened. He nodded and said, "I believe you." That sentence felt like sunlight after weeks of shadow. The next step was to confront Nina. But not in secret. Not quietly. Irene suggested we set a trap of our own. A controlled meeting, public place, clear evidence, witnesses. And this time we'd let her show her true face. We chose the park near the lake where she used to feed ducks as a child. I sent a message from the burner phone asking to meet. I told her I was okay, that I didn't want to involve police, but I needed to see her one last time. Her reply came fast. "Yes, of course, just tell me where." We chose Saturday morning, 9 a.m., a time when the park would be just busy enough. We placed Paul nearby on a bench with a newspaper. Detective Marvin would be in plain clothes by the fountain. Irene would stay in the car with Delilah, listening via a live audio feed from my necklace recorder. I arrived early and sat on the bench near the willow tree. I didn't feel fear, just resolve. I waited, and at exactly 9, Nina appeared at the far end of the path, walking briskly, eyes locked on me. She looked relieved, almost smug. She sat down next to me and reached for my hand. I pulled it away gently. "I needed space," I said. "You weren't giving me any." She tilted her head, studying me. "I was giving you protection, Mom. You needed me." I nodded slowly. "That's what you keep saying." Her smile faltered. "What's this about? Are you coming home?" I looked at her then, really looked, at the daughter I once knew, now a stranger. "Not until I'm safe. Not until I know the truth." She laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. "What truth?" she asked. "You're confused. You've always been fragile. I've just tried to hold things together." I leaned closer, then explained the forged documents, the fake doctor, the locked closet, the insurance money. Her face paled. She started to speak, but I raised one hand and pressed the button on my necklace. The tiny speaker replayed her own voice. "You don't need to make decisions anymore. I'll do it for you." People nearby turned. She froze. The sound played again. She stood up quickly. "You set me up." Her voice shook. I looked up at her. "No, Nina, you did that all by yourself." And then Detective Marvin appeared at her side. Detective Marvin spoke calmly and with authority. He asked Nina to sit back down. She refused. Her eyes darted between me and the small crowd that had started to form. "I don't know what this is," she said quickly, "but my mother's been unstable for months. She disappeared. She stopped taking her medication. This is a misunderstanding." Marvin didn't flinch. We have audio recordings, we have documents. You're not under arrest yet, but we do need you to come with us for further questioning. Nina took a step back. You don't understand. She's manipulating you. She's always been good at twisting stories. I watched her unravel and I felt a deep ache. This was my daughter, the child I'd once cradled through fevers and night terrors. And now she stood there, spinning lies like they were second nature. Detective Marvin nodded to a uniformed officer who had just arrived. They flanked her gently, not touching her, but making it clear that her options were limited. She looked at me one more time, her eyes full of betrayal. But it wasn't the betrayal of someone being wronged, it was the betrayal of someone who had lost control. I didn't say anything as they guided her away. I couldn't, my throat was too tight. Irene approached then, along with Delilah and Paul. Paul had already made the call to the district attorney's office. The evidence we'd compiled was thorough. Over the next few days, Nina would face formal charges for financial exploitation of a senior, fraud, forgery, and attempted medical deception. Possibly even attempted harm, depending on the toxicology results of the pills she'd been giving me. We handed over the bottles. Irene had already confirmed with a pharmacy expert that the dosage was not only inappropriate, but potentially dangerous over long periods. Back at the safe house, I sat in the living room clutching the small journal I'd kept hidden all those weeks. Delilah made tea while Irene reviewed the final statements we'd need to present to the court. I could feel something cracking open inside me. Not just the fear or the pain, but the realization that I wasn't invisible anymore, that my voice had reached someone, that someone had listened. The news spread quickly. Local media picked up the story after the district attorney made a statement about the rise in elder abuse cases involving family members. They didn't name Nina directly at first, but people figured it out. I received messages through Irene's office, old colleagues, former students, even neighbors who'd stopped talking to me after Nina moved in. They were sorry they hadn't known they wanted to help. The arrest led to more discoveries. Paul found that Nina had created shell documents that showed she was my power of attorney. The signatures had been copied from older birthday cards. The ink didn't match. The dates were inconsistent. She had opened a credit card in my name. She had used it to pay for high-end furniture and electronics, delivered to a storage unit she'd been renting under a fake name. They found the unit. Inside were hundreds of items, things she had slowly taken from my home or bought using my identity. It was a monument to control. She'd even drafted a motion to declare me legally incompetent. It had been scheduled to be reviewed in probate court the same week I left. Her plan was nearly complete. A few more weeks and she would have had full control over everything I owned, my home, my savings, my medical decisions, my life. When the toxicology results came in, it confirmed that the pills she'd been giving me were not prescribed under any legitimate source. They were obtained through a supplier who had lost their license years ago. Irene suspected that Nina had been accessing old prescription pads from her brief marriage to Adam, who had once worked in medical software. Nina refused to speak during questioning. Her lawyer argued that she had only been trying to protect me, that she feared I would be taken advantage of by strangers, but the evidence was too overwhelming. A month later, we stood in a courtroom. She was present, hands folded neatly, her expression blank. I gave a statement. I didn't read from a paper. I spoke from memory. I told the judge what it felt like to be silenced slowly, to have your own daughter become your warden, to doubt your mind, your memory, your worth. I spoke not with anger, but with clarity, with sadness, with strength. The judge ruled in my favor. Not only was I declared fully competent, but the court also froze all assets Nina had attempted to transfer. She was ordered to undergo psychological evaluation and placed under supervised probation until a full trial. Irene later told me it was one of the fastest and most decisive rulings she'd seen in years. After the hearing, I returned to the apartment one last time. Paul had arranged for a locksmith to be present. The door opened like a wound. I stepped inside slowly. It didn't feel like home anymore. The curtains were drawn. The air was stale. My favorite chair was gone, replaced by a leather recliner I didn't recognize. I walked through each room. My bedroom had been rearranged, boxes where photos used to be labels on drawers. The fridge was nearly empty. I sat down at the kitchen table and exhaled. I thought about all the time I had lost, not just the weeks I'd been under her control, but the slow erosion that began long before that, when I let small things slide, when I allowed myself to be diminished in the name of love. But I also thought about what I'd reclaimed: my voice, my autonomy, my truth. I packed a few personal items, paintbrushes, sketch pads, my late mother's necklace, a framed photo of me and Delilah from our college days. Then I left the keys on the counter and closed the door behind me. In the weeks that followed, I moved into a small cottage near the edge of town. It had sunlight in the mornings and birdsong in the evenings. Delilah visited often. Irene stopped by with updates. Paul called to let me know that the court had approved the return of most of my assets. The credit damage would take time to repair, but we were working on it. One evening I received a letter. It was from Nina, handwritten. The words were careful, controlled. She said she was sorry, that she never meant to hurt me, that she just wanted to keep me safe, that everything had gotten out of hand. I read it once. Then again, I didn't know if I believed her. I didn't know if I ever would. But I kept the letter not for forgiveness, but as a record. A reminder of what happens when love turns into something else. And then one afternoon, as I was sketching the lake behind my cottage, a man approached. He was older, maybe late 60s, tall, polite. He said he used to be one of my students, that he'd read about what happened. He said his name was Roger. He brought a small canvas with him and asked if I could help him improve his brushwork. I smiled. For the first time in a long time. It felt easy. We sat and painted together in silence. The lake shimmered in the late sun, and in that quiet I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Not the kind that comes from silence, but the kind that comes from being heard, being seen, and choosing to live anyway. I woke up to the sound of rain tapping gently against the windows of the cottage. The morning light was soft and silver, spreading across the wooden floor like a blanket. I sat up slowly, letting the quiet fill me. There was no rush, no checklist, no voice outside my door asking if I had taken my pills. Just stillness and my own breath, steady and calm. Over the past few weeks, I had started to rediscover a rhythm that belonged only to me. I woke early, made tea, sat on the porch with a sketch pad, and drew whatever the morning gave me. Sometimes the lake, sometimes the trees, sometimes just the way the light caught the edge of the clouds I painted, not for anyone else, not for a gallery, not to prove anything, just to feel the color move from my mind to my hands and finally onto paper. Delilah visited twice a week, bringing baked goods and updates from town. She told me people still whispered about what had happened. Some took my side without hesitation. Others remained quiet, unsure of what to believe. But I didn't need their approval anymore. I had spent too long asking for permission to exist. As I was, I didn't owe anyone a version of myself they could easily understand. Roger came by on weekends carrying his canvas, and that gentle smile that reminded me of simpler days. He didn't ask questions, he didn't try to fix me, he just painted beside me, and sometimes we'd talk about art, and sometimes we wouldn't. One afternoon he said that watching me work made him remember his wife, how she used to paint wildflowers onto the walls of their kitchen before she passed. I told him that grief had its own palette, and sometimes we painted with colors no one else could see. I didn't visit Nina. She remained in the care of the legal system, undergoing evaluations and answering for her choices. Her letter remained in the drawer beside my bed unread since that first time I hadn't responded. I wasn't sure if I ever would. Healing didn't always mean returning to what was. Sometimes it meant building something entirely new with gentler hands. The house where she and I had lived for so many years was put up for sale. I didn't go back. I didn't want to walk through those rooms again. Not because they scared me, but because they didn't belong to me anymore. That version of me, the one who sat quietly while her life was erased piece by piece, had been left behind. Irene called to tell me that the final restitution from the case had gone through. A portion of the money Nina had taken was returned, enough to give me breathing room enough to buy art supplies without guilt, enough to plant a garden in the spring. Paul told me that the judge had issued a formal statement recognizing the emotional and psychological abuse I had endured. It was a rare thing, he said, and a powerful one. One evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, I stood by the window holding a brush in one hand and a cup of tea in the other. I looked out at the world I had rebuilt quietly, piece by piece, with no grand announcements, no drama, just truth and choice and breath. I thought of all the women I had once taught women who had doubted their worth because someone else had told them they were too much or not enough. I wished I could gather them. Now tell them it's never too late to reclaim your story. Never too late to listen to that small voice inside that says, "This is not how it has to be." I thought of my mother, her quiet strength, the way she once told me that survival wasn't about being fearless. It was about being willing to keep going, even when your heart had forgotten. How I finally understood what she meant. That night I added one final line to the back of my journal, written in the same pen I had used to document every detail of my undoing and every step of my return. I am still here. I am not lost. I am becoming. There are moments in life when silence becomes a weapon, when the absence of belief in your voice becomes more painful than the words themselves, when the people you love begin to shape a version of you that only serves their comfort and control, and you start to doubt the shape of your own memory, the sound of your own thoughts, the rhythm of your own truth. I learned that love without respect is just another form of possession, that care given without consent is not care at all, but manipulation masked as kindness, that protection used to erase someone's autonomy is a quiet violence dressed in concern. For too long I told myself that enduring was the same as loving, that if I stayed quiet, if I was patient, if I made myself smaller, maybe things would return to the way they once were. But the truth is, silence doesn't bring healing, it buries it. And I buried myself under years of compromise, thinking that sacrifice was strength, when really strength is choosing yourself, even when it means walking away from everything familiar. To anyone listening who feels like their voice has been stolen, who feels surrounded by people who love them only when they are weak, who has been told again and again that their instincts are wrong, their memory is flawed, their heart is too fragile, I want you to hear this. You are not imagining things. You are not too sensitive. You are not asking for too much. You are waking up, and waking up is painful, but it is also powerful. You do not owe anyone your silence, not your children, not your spouse, not your family, and especially not those who weaponize your love against you. Your worth is not measured by how quietly you suffer, but by how boldly you choose to live again. You are not broken. You are rebuilding, and rebuilding is the bravest thing you will ever do.